Well, Wrestling Premier's here. What's up, guys? I decided, you know what? Today, let's go with this one. It is definitely a big challenge that I have. I consider it a challenge due to the fact that, one, there's a reason why I haven't uploaded one of these SmackDown eras or Raw eras videos in a while. They're so damn hard. You have to, talk about everyone and everything that happened throughout the era. You have to mention how the ratings were and all that stuff. And yeah, it's just hard. That's why I refrained from this one for a bit. But here it is. I decided, you know what, let's man up. Let's do it today. If there's one era of SmackDown that the majority of folks agree was the best, it has to be SmackDown of 2002 to 2004. Personally, my favorite is SmackDown from 05 to 09 for obvious reasons, but I can acknowledge the 02-04 era as the best. Now, why is it the best? There was hunger, passion, fire, and determination from the stars and the guys behind the scenes. They wanted SmackDown to succeed in spite of many who believed Raw was the A show. While you had Triple H hogging a big chunk of screen time on Mondays, you get ridiculous classics between the likes of Kurt Angle, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero on Thursdays. It was some entertaining stuff, and it doesn't matter what combination of talent, it was gonna be good. The show was fairly evened out. The ratings from July of 2002 to March of 2004 were fairly consistent, around the 3.2 to 3.6 area, I believe. After the 2004 draft, SmackDown basically collapsed, and you should just look at the ratings for proof of that. As you all know, the intros for the show were Beautiful People by Marilyn Manson, and I Want It All, which will never not give me Here Comes the Pain vibe, so yeah. Now, in these videos, I go from draft to draft because the show feels familiar. Right now, let's get into it. As you most likely know, WWE in 2002 decided to split up the roster between two brands. This was to help with the overflow of talents coming in from WCW, and some disliked that decision, and it showed from a ratings perspective. But it also provided benefits to guys like Eddie Guerrero and Edge. The mid-carders were given a chance to propel themselves to main event status, and add to the departure of Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock, appearing less often, it was clear WWE was getting desperate in finding the next top stars to lead the company. There was some competition between both brands over who could do better. SmackDown was led by Paul Heyman, who was the head writer, and I believe he held the position from July of 2002 all the way up to February of 2003. Rumor has it Stephanie had a hand in getting Paul removed from that position, and I believe there was some animosity there between those two, as Paul was hard-headed. He always wanted to get his idea, and he was always butting heads during this time period, so yeah. The biggest success to come from this era of SmackDown was probably the SmackDown 6. You grab 6 talented, and that's an understatement, wrestlers. Some are mid-carders, some have just debuted, some have been to the top of the mountain, and you just let them loose. That's it. Chavo Guerrero, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Edge, Rey Mysterio, and Kurt Angle. The story of how it came to be is pretty interesting. Paul Heyman decided to trade Chris Jericho for Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit. Now, was this a bad trade? Well, it depends on your perspective, as Y2J had just main evented WrestleMania, but Paul had a vision for the show. He realized that he could pair the Guerreros together, Benoit can team up with Angle, and Rey and Edge could be a team together. What's funny about this is the fact that Raw thought Heyman got the short end of the stick. It's hard to compare to sports, but Jericho at the time was somewhat a bigger star than both Eddie and Chris. He wasn't way bigger than them or anything like that, but Jericho had just main evented WrestleMania. Why the hell would you trade him in? And obviously Raw accepted that trade because, well, why wouldn't you? You got to look at their perspective from 02. Like Chris Benoit, this guy just came back from a neck injury, and Eddie Guerrero had just returned to the company in general. So what do you guys think? Would you have made that trade if you were in their position? With the trade, those 6 basically turned SmackDown into the show. They played a very big part in making SmackDown the A show for a short time. Obviously, Raw was the A show in Vince's eyes, but for the fans, Thursday nights was where it's at. Any combination of those 6 ends up being match of the night, and it didn't matter if it was Edge versus Chavo or Angle versus Eddie, it was always going to be good. Their presence not only helped SmackDown in 2002 to 2003, but also for years to follow. Eddie became WWE champion, Rey and Kurt ended up leading the brand a couple of times, Edge became the face of the show in 2007, Chavo was the workhorse of the blue brand on and off for 6 years, and Chris Benoit was, in my opinion, the best damn United States champion in WWE. Their efforts in making SmackDown awesome will never go unnoticed, except for Benoit. Moving on, let's mention some of the lesser spoken things from this era of SmackDown. First up, Billy and Chuck. When Paul Heyman took the reins of SmackDown, these guys' run was starting to come to an end. Along with Rico, their personal stylist, the duo always implied that they were gay. They never outright said it, although it was basically out there. The two were initially heels but turned face, and a wedding was planned for the two on SmackDown in September of 2002. Glad noticed this and helped WWE gain coverage in the media. But then, when the wedding occurred, it wasn't what it was expected to be. Billy and Chuck weren't gay, and Billy Gunn even said that if he was gay, he wouldn't have married Chuck anyways. To say glad or angry would be an understatement, but hey, at least this epic Eric Bischoff moment came from it. Overall, the Billy and Chuck thing wasn't really praised back then, and I don't really think it is now. Billy ended up returning. Chuck, we'll get into him soon. Moving on from this team, I'd like to mention another tag team from this era of SmackDown. the Bastion Brothers. Now, if your knowledge of these two is exclusive to their involvement in JBL's title reign, well, this is nothing compared to that. Shaniqua was her valet. She whooped him and got the job done for him if necessary. And I find it weird how Shaniqua never did much in the company because, one, there wasn't the power-type diva at this point on either Raw or SmackDown. Two, she was athletic. But I believe it was due to her attitude backstage. But yes, the whole Bastion Brothers thing stood out because of their gimmick. Like, who in the hell did that gimmick in the 2000s in WWE? No one. They did have some awesome matches with Los Guerreros that led to a title reign, so there's that. Next up, Jamie Noble and Nydia. Their characters were that of basically trailer park trash. One thing I liked for bad or for good of 2000s WWE, a bunch of guys were distinguishable. As stupid as the gimmicks may be, they were different from each other. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, there are some gimmicks you wish never happened in the first place, but they had character. Upon becoming Cruiserweight Champion, Noble purchased a trailer, he started to spoil his girl, and at this point, he was a Cruiserweight, yet at the same time, he was given a noticeable amount of screen time. That's what I'm trying to say. He can go in the ring, and some of the stuff he was doing outside was hilarious. At one point, he received inheritance money from his family and became rich. He bought his girl a fur coat, and it led to Jamie aspiring to get with Tori Wilson, and it was just a bizarre story that I will cover eventually. He was still with Nydia at this point, yet he wanted Tori. He got his wish after beating Billy Gunn at Vengeance, and that whole thing turned into something else involving both Nydia and Billy Gunn themselves. From there, Noble continued to compete in the Cruiserweight division, but one night, Tajiri spat black mist into Nydia's face, and as a result of the mist, she was temporarily blind. Tajiri's all happy about it, I don't know why. And unfortunately for Nydia, Noble began using her as a human shield. This turned Noble into a heel once again, and eventually she realized what was up, and at the same time, her vision was back. She returned the favor by giving Noble's money to the fans, and this whole thing culminated in a match at No Way Out with Noble wearing a blindfold. He cheated to win that match, and that's the story. Overall, Noble was awesome. He took the character and made it into something. Didn't matter if it was the matches, they were fun. Segments, he was rude, sleazy, and somewhat hilarious. I just love this character, and I think he is the most overlooked character from this era of SmackDown. Moving on from Noble, I'd like to mention the full-blooded Italians. For some reason, I have a somewhat soft spot for this team. Why? Well, I like the idea of a mob faction. Nunzio was the leader, Johnny the Bull Stamboli and Chuck Palumbo were basically the heavy, although they were somewhat equal. Despite Nunzio being the leader, they were all on the same level. The trio were featured nearly every week on SmackDown throughout 2003. They did Mr. McMahon and Big Show's dirty work occasionally, and there was a little story with The Undertaker. At the end of 2003, they set up a gambling ring for the SmackDown stars to bet on matches. Obviously, they didn't do much afterwards, but the guys did what they could with the gimmick, although I believe there was many ideas management could have utilized for the group. Will I dive into them in the future? Hell yes. Okay, from FBI to Devil's Advocate, Sean O'Hare. The one thing that he had going for himself for a very short time was the Devil's Advocate gimmick. It was really ahead of his time with the character, the vignettes were awesome, and he began appearing backstage. A couple of weeks later, he made this debut, but unfortunately, and I recently just found this out, O'Hare botched one of his first promos, and so he was paired with Roddy Piper. He did have a moderate push of sorts, beating the likes of Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero, but after Piper was released, he was relegated to Velocity. Actually, scratch that, he was barely on Velocity. He never really recovered from there on, and in April of 2004, he was released. O'Hare never really got a fair share compared to others, as he only had one chance and it was blown, I guess. Like, they could have done more with the character. He had a unique look. The whole Devil's Advocate thing would have probably worked had they given it more time. Another failed prospect from this era of SmackDown was Ultimo Dragon. They made a big deal of his debut in MSG. Talented individual, he may have slowed down a bit at this point, but he was still good. WWE, as expected, didn't capitalize. It was a bizarre signing. Like, why would you bring this guy in and not do anything with him? They expected Rey Mysterio number 2, but it never materialized at all. Within a year, Dragon parted ways with WWE to go back to Japan. So basically, underwhelming run. I don't even know if we could even make a video out of that run. Like, what am I going to talk about? He debuts, loses matches, loses, appears at WrestleMania, released. That's it. Okay, if you're talking about underdogs from this era of SmackDown, the first person to pop in your mind has to be Zach Gowen. It's probably going to be Rey Mysterio, but after him, it has to be this guy. He had his leg amputated, yet still made it to the WWE. It was a feel-good story, but not only that, the kid was 20 years old at this point, and he's out there main eventing SmackDown with Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle. Say what you want about his attitude or anything, the storyline, whatever, but this man was truly the definition of inspirational during this time period. Moving on from Gowen, I'd like to mention the Cruiserweight Division. From 2002 to 2004, the Cruiserweight Championship was mostly a respectable title. Matt Hardy version 1 worked his heart out in order to lose weight and get a title shot. Rey and Chavo were killing each other for the gold. But after WrestleMania 20, it was a different story. But from 02 to 04, the titles run featured some very entertaining matches between the likes of Tajiri, Jamie Noble, Matt Hardy version 1, Rey Mysterio, and Chavo Guerrero. It wasn't like the title matches sucked afterwards, but it wasn't showcased as much as it was previously. As for the tag team division, it was at times pretty stacked. Initially, the SmackDown 6 dominated, then New Blood in the form of Shelton Benjamin and Charlie Haas won the gold. Their matches throughout 2003 with the tag titles were superb. They were pure workhorses. They had amazing chemistry, and my personal favorite match of theirs was against Ray and Billy Kidman at Vengeance 2003. Complete classic. I can't stress it enough. My favorite tag match of 03 is that one. Following this, Los Guerreros and the Bastions were around the tag division, but once 2004 rolled around, the tag division wasn't as important as it was previously. Rikishi and Scotty 2 Hotty did hold the gold, although it wasn't that memorable. The APA were splitting up, the Bastions disappeared for 9 months, and the world's greatest tag team were a victim of the draft. Scotty and Rikishi once again split, but this time it was because Rikishi was asked to lose weight. He didn't, and so he was released. Overall, the division was stacked, but over time lost star power to either the draft or because they moved on to bigger, better things like Eddie. After Los Guerreros left, I felt like I lost a bit of star power and luster. Moving on to one of the wildest stories of this era of SmackDown, Al Wilson. The whole thing. So, this has to be the strangest story of 02-04 SmackDown, right? Dawn Marie initially had an issue with Tori Wilson, and over time it turned into something else. Dawn began going out with Al Wilson, Tori's father, and shortly thereafter they got engaged, much to the dismay of Tori. Then one night, Dawn asked Tori to meet her at the hotel, and if she does, Dawn will break off the engagement. Tori got down with it as the footage showed, but Dawn obviously didn't go through with the deal. A couple of weeks later, the engaged couple wed in unique fashion, and then after having too much fun on the honeymoon, Al Wilson died. What? It was bizarre. The whole thing culminated at the Royal Rumble in the match between Tori and Dawn. Tori won, and that's it. Overall, a wild story that was definitely from Paul Heyman's mind. The fact that Al Wilson died in storyline, it's just, I don't know what to say about that. I will definitely dive into the story eventually, but one thing to note about this is that it has to be Paul Heyman. You can't tell me otherwise. One storyline in general, unfortunately, didn't receive a conclusion. Mr. America. So the original story was between Vince and Hulk. They had a fun match at WrestleMania. They had no right to be that damn good. Following this, Vince fires Hogan and he's finally at peace with himself. A couple of weeks later, Mr. America makes his debut and Vince was quite the skeptic. I mean, it does kind of look like Hulk Hogan. But it was proven not to be him because one night Hogan appeared on satellite thousands of miles away. Mr. America, however, was inspired by Hulk Hogan to become a wrestler, so there's that. Unfortunately, the story never had a proper conclusion due to Mr. America's departure from WWE in July of 2003. This did happen, though. Mr. America revealed himself. I believe it was supposed to lead to a rematch from WrestleMania 19 between Hulk Hogan and McMahon at WrestleMania 20. At the same time, Vince's relationship with his daughter Stephanie went south. She managed to get Zach Gowen hired. She was against Vince's guys, and slowly it was reaching a boiling point. Vince began feeding his daughter to the Sharks. He was trying to find ways to get rid of her because she was a GM, and so he booked himself in an I Quit match against his own daughter at No Mercy. If she loses, she resigns. If he loses, he's gone. The family drama came to an end that night when Linda McMahon threw in the towel, and so she was gone. This was because Stephanie was going to marry Triple H later that week, I believe. Then Vince shoved his wife next to his mistress, and it was very out there. He was this tyrannical boss with his reign having no end in sight, I guess. The Undertaker himself, he wanted to get rid of McMahon after the boss made the mistake of giving Big Evil a choice of what match he wanted at Survivor Series. Undertaker chose Buried Alive, and he wanted his opponent to be Vince. So now he's in a Buried Alive match, right? Well, Vince believed a higher power was on his side, and so he isn't losing. He even prayed for a second before the match. The match itself, he got his ass whooped. Simply put, he was beaten within an inch of his life, and he was bleeding within the first minute. That's how bad it was. But I guess his prayers were answered when Kane made the save. He buried his brother, and that was it for McMahon. Following this, he began appearing less often on SmackDown, and yeah, that's Vince of 2003. Now, many believe the McMahons hogged a hell of a lot of screen time. Is that true? Yes. Every week on SmackDown, the McMahons were there. Doesn't mean the story sucked. Depends on your opinion. But good or bad, one thing to note is that Vince was one of the best damn characters throughout the year. Okay, moving on from Vince, I'd like to mention the Big Show. This era of SmackDown really helped the Big Show greatly. Paul Heyman booked him well, and he was never underutilized. He was always a focal point of the show, whether he was WWE Champion or throwing Rey Mysterio, who was on a damn stretcher. He was doing something. But that moment itself, man, screw him for that. He played a major role in the SmackDown storylines, and he also played a major role in the next guy's rise to the top, John Cena. The basic sports team colors wearing guy turned rapper. He was a product of his time. You know, 50 Cent, Eminem, all that stuff. It was early 2000s. I mean, what do you expect from the early 2000s? And that's what got him over. Once he got his character down around March 2003, he was doing some stuff since November, but by March, That's it. I believe he had the character down completely. He was featured on every show from there on. He was featured on every pay-per-view. He got his own theme song made by himself. He quickly got over with his raps. His character in general was very over, and by the end of this era of SmackDown, Cena was a babyface and he was the United States champion. At this point, I believe there was little doubt about Cena being World Championship material. Okay, the mid-card scene in general on SmackDown from 2002 to 2004 was once again fun. Honorable mentions would be Rhino and Tajiri and A-Train. Those guys are pretty underappreciated, especially Rhino. He may have never won a title during this era of SmackDown, but he did have some awesome matches with Chris, Eddie, World's Greatest Tag Team, etc. Tajiri, once again, special matches with Rey Mysterio. Eddie, he could bounce around from the Cruiserweight Division to the mid-card U.S. title picture. He was definitely overlooked. He was clearly overlooked. One of the very best wrestlers from 02-04 SmackDown. This era of SmackDown saw the return of the United States Championship. At this point, SmackDown was severely lacking a title in the mid-card, and once the U.S. title was unveiled, it helped greatly. It gave guys like Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit something to do. There was a tournament for the title, which culminated in a match between those two at Vengeance, and that match was great. Can't stress it enough. Both guys were certainly capable of making the title feel like a big deal. Eddie's title reign featured a feud with John Cena and The Big Show. And during the title reign, Eddie was very over. He was technically a heel, but he turned face without doing anything. That's how over he was. The title was then held by Big Show, who was main eventing SmackDown nearly every week. There wasn't that many title defenses. The champions didn't really lose that much. Pretty respected throughout 2003 and early 2004. Moving on, I have to mention Rey Mysterio. This guy in 02 to 04 was tremendous. Didn't matter if it was Tajiri or Brock Lesnar, you were in for a great match. He had some good runs with the tag and cruiserweight titles. He was probably at his peak in WWE at this point, other than 09. Because he was jumping around, hitting some ridiculous moves. I loved his matches from this era. They were some of his very best. Overall, he was one of the very best talents from this era of SmackDown. Okay, next up, Chris Benoit. There's no denying that Benoit was arguably the very best wrestler during this era of SmackDown. Can't be stressed enough. At this point, he really deserved a run with the world title. His efforts were rewarded, but not on SmackDown, though. Near the end of 2003, he was on a roll. There was this classic match against Brock Lesnar that felt like a prelude to a WrestleMania match, perhaps. But it wasn't, and after winning the Rumble, Chris opted to move to Raw. Check out this video for that story, but yes, Chris Benoit, during this run, he was very well respected, and once 2003 came to an end, I felt like they made up their minds. They're like, this guy, he has to win that title. The fans were behind him, and no, I'm not over-exaggerating. Just go check Chris Benoit from November, December 03, and tell me otherwise. He certainly deserved that title when you look at it from that time period. Who's next? Kurt Angle. My personal favorite wrestler from this era of SmackDown. Whether he was a detestable heel or an underdog babyface, he was entertaining. I love the Team Angle arc as he brought in two guys and mentored them, coached them to the tag team championships. That match with the Benoit has to be the best Rumble title match. And it was probably, keyword probably, WWE's best matchup from 2003. Depends on your opinion. It put Triple H and Scott Steiner's match to shame. His story with Brock Lesnar was superb. He fought with a broken freaking neck and managed to put on a clinic at WrestleMania 19. Returned after surgery that was supposed to keep him out for a year as a babyface, continued the story with Brock and they reversed roles. Classics at SummerSlam and SmackDown, but after that, he lost steam. So he turned heel and had an epic match with Eddie Guerrero at WrestleMania 20 for the title. After the draft, Angle took the role of a GM, but that's a whole other story. Yes, if I have to rank Angle from this era of SmackDown, I think he has to be number 2 or number 3. Definitely. Next up, The Undertaker. The whole Big Evil run was starting to come to an end, but he went out with a bang. He had a little thing with a Big Show and A-Train. Nathan Jones was under his wing for 2 seconds. Taker at this point was the veteran. He didn't do a lot of great, amazing stuff during his time. But I'd say his best work was perhaps with Brock Lesnar. The Hell in a Cell thing. Yeah, I think it's undeniable that Brock Lesnar was Taker's best opponent during this era of SmackDown. His best match, Hell in a Cell with Brock, and that title match with Angle in August or September of 2003. That was awesome. It has to be in Big Evil's top 5 matches, from 2000 to 2004. Yeah, it has to be up there. Also, by the time Taker returned, he returned as a dead man, and SmackDown was very different. With that said, there's still 2 guys that must be mentioned. First up, Eddie Guerrero. If there's one guy that benefited the most from the SmackDown 6 initially, it's Latino. He showed that he had the goods to not only be a single star, but a major superstar. The Los Guerreros thing was fun, and I really want to cover it soon. At one point, Eddie was the workhorse of SmackDown from May to August or September of 2003. He sometimes defended the tag titles and the U.S. title on one night. and overall he was on a roll. It seemed like the time for Eddie as champion was coming. He got the title match at No Way Out, and the rest was history. We all know how that turned out. That moment when he won the title, that was truly a memorable, I wouldn't even say memorable, that's an understatement. It was truly a legendary moment. And lastly, Brock Lesnar, the best damn guy from this era. I can't say otherwise. He was a rookie that ascended to the top in 5 months. Then he became a good guy that just plowed through anyone in his way. And Track Pants Brock was probably my favorite from this run. I just loved how he ran in there, manhandles the Big Show. The fans would go crazy. That was fun. He then became a heel that didn't give a damn about anyone's well-being. He straight up killed Zach Gowen, beat Kurt Angle in an Iron Man match, had fun occasionally. His wrestling style back then was a lot different to nowadays. He used to actually execute more than 4 moves. It was much more entertaining to watch in the ring. Like, I could watch a Brock match now. He tells a great story in there, but these matches, they're gems. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, and that's what happened in March 2004. After his legendary match with Goldberg at WrestleMania 20, Brock Lesnar departed the WWE. And with his departure, the 02-04 era of SmackDown was basically over. Now the question, why is WrestleMania 20 the cutoff line? The draft happened 8 days after WrestleMania. SmackDown later that week felt so damn different. Brock was gone, Taker wasn't Big Evil, Paul Heyman quit in storyline, Kurt Angle was the GM, Big Show eventually went on hiatus, and Bradshaw of the APA became John Bradshaw Layfield. Overall, SmackDown from July 2002 all the way up to March 2004 is looked at fondly by many. Is it the best era of SmackDown? I don't think there's doubt in that one. To quote a certain someone, you get the best of both worlds. Stories and matches. Were all the stories good? Nope. But still, even if there was a subpar story, you'd find something else that's enjoyable on the show. Don't like the Tory story? There's Brock Lesnar achieving championship glory. Dislike Stephanie and Vince? There's Eddie and Chris. The roster was stacked as hell. The Cruiserweight Division featured a ridiculous amount of talent. Noble, Ray, Tajiri. Mid-card featured Edge initially, who I didn't even mention at all because he really didn't do that much post-SmackDown 6. There was A-Train, Eddie, Chris, Cena. Damn. I didn't even mention the main event scene, which was stacked up to the gills. SmackDown felt like the wrestling show. Michael Cole and Taz were great together. Amazing chemistry. Cole wasn't as much of a catchphrase machine yet. And I don't think he's a bad announcer per se, but the WWE forces him to be unnatural. Now, what was the best moment from this era? I'd say the ring breaking. Nothing touches that in my eyes. Best match? Depends on your opinion. Think it's Angle versus Brock Iron Man. Those are my favorites. What are your favorites? Please comment down below. That's your first video. Make sure you hit a 619 on the like button and perhaps the F5 on the subscribe button. Peace. I'm out.